I think in film, everybody's always vying for power and control. I think that this is probably the most intense situation I've ever been in film. He was one of the few directors I've worked for that was very kind and respectful. In my opinion, I find it very hard to believe the allegations against him. And considering his mission statement about the film and him genuinely pitching that he was doing this film to help young women, I just find it hard to believe.
When you're dealing with someone who shows narcissistic behavior, especially during a lawsuit, it can sometimes feel like the legal process is being misused. Narcissists often try to use legal actions to intimidate or silence critics. This can include people who speak out against them, like journalists, YouTubers, or bloggers. In this particular situation, Blake Lively appears to be doing just that, using the court system in a way that seems more about controlling narratives than about justice. Since Justin Baldoni's case was dismissed, attention has shifted to another case, Vanzan Inc. versus Due Defendants. This case was filed in New York in September 2024. The claims are fairly standard: breach of contract and damage to reputation, but the way it's being handled is raising concerns. The only subpoena from this lawsuit so far has gone to Jones Works, specifically asking for the contents of a phone that belonged to Jen Abel, a former employee. Now, things get complicated. There are two different companies named Vanzan Inc., one in California and one in New York. The California version, tied to Blake, is no longer legally allowed to operate due to unpaid taxes and past legal problems. The New York one, reportedly owned by Ryan Reynolds, is the one issuing subpoenas. The confusion over ownership, location, and purpose adds to the idea that something shady might be going on. Recently, TMZ released a story saying Blake had subpoenaed 3 big content creators: Candace Owens, Andy Signori, and Perez Hilton. But Candace denied receiving anything, and Perez said the same in a video. He even pointed out that no subpoenas have been served since May, and most were actually sent out months ago. The legal deadline to produce documents is today, and issuing a new subpoena now would make it very hard for anyone to comply in time. It's too close to the deadline, and legal timelines must be followed. Still, the media buzz helps Blake. The headlines make it seem like these creators are somehow involved in a smear campaign against her and Ryan. This kind of public narrative can damage reputations even if it's not true. Content creators like Shady have been targeted in public but never formally subpoenaed, despite being accused of spreading false information. No legal action has actually been taken against her. Blake's strategy seems to be more about creating doubt than proving anything. By dragging in popular creators, she might be trying to discredit them and make their content seem unreliable. Meanwhile, her own case is in a fragile state. The court recently heard that Blake may have received evidence in a way that violated proper legal procedures. Jen Abel, through her motion to compel, argued that the case itself might have been created just to gather private information improperly. In US law, people have the right to know when they're being subpoenaed, so they can object. If they're not informed, the evidence gathered might be thrown out. Jen wasn't told about the subpoena even though her data was being requested. That's a problem. Blake's claim that everything was done legally is being questioned. If the court agrees that it was done improperly, she might lose the ability to use that evidence at all. This could result in her case falling apart entirely and possibly facing legal consequences herself. In the end, it looks like Blake is trying to control the story by targeting those talking about it. But the legal cracks are starting to show. Blake Lively didn't follow proper legal steps when she got access to data that was supposed to stay within a different case. In federal court, evidence collected during discovery in one case isn't supposed to be shared or used in another lawsuit without getting permission from a judge. So if she wanted those documents from Vanzan Inc., she should have formally requested them through legal channels. Passing information from Vanzan to Blake personally without court approval breaks the rules of how evidence is handled, and that causes serious issues. One major problem is that there's no clear proof showing where the evidence came from. and whether it was changed or tampered with. This is called a chain of custody, and without it, there's no way to confirm if the evidence is real. Now, there are even reports that some of the digital files are missing metadata, which makes it harder to trust the information. If the source of the evidence isn't clear or it looks like it was shared outside legal procedures, then courts might throw it out completely. On top of that, there's concern that Blake used the lawsuit mainly as a trick to get access to information. If she used the case just to collect data and then closed it quickly to avoid being challenged, that's considered an abuse of the legal process. Courts do not like when lawsuits are filed just to gather evidence in secret. There are also serious privacy concerns. Some of the data might have come from iCloud or iMessage accounts, which are protected by U.S. privacy laws like the Stored Communications Act and the Federal Wiretap Act. Violating these protections can lead to big consequences, such as sanctions, suppression of evidence, or even lawsuits for invasion of privacy. If it turns out that this information was gathered improperly, the people affected can ask the court to block the use of that data or punish Blake's legal team. This might explain why Blake doesn't want the public talking about how she got the evidence. A lawyer even said that if the judge ignores these problems, it could create an ethical issue and be overturned. Later in appeals, the issue about who owned the phone involved in this case is also complicated. Even if the phone was owned by Stephanie Jones, that doesn't mean she could freely hand over private conversations or data, especially if it involves someone else's personal messages. If she had confidentiality agreements with Wayfair or Baldoni, then she wasn't allowed to share that information without a subpoena. So even if it was a company phone, it still doesn't mean that private data was fair game. Legal experts also believe that Wayfair should appeal the judge's decision to dismiss their case. They argue the judge made a mistake by throwing out the case before discovery was complete. If Wayfair had known about this evidence problem before, it could have shown that Blake's side used the courts in the wrong way. Also, the judge gave too much protection to Blake and Ryan under the idea of litigation privilege, saying they couldn't be blamed because they were involved in a lawsuit. But many of the things they're accused of doing happened before the lawsuit was even filed. There's also confusion about Ryan Reynolds' role. The subpoenas came from a company that he supposedly controls, not from Blake. That raises more questions, especially since it seems like Ryan's company was trying to get private data linked to a breach of contract claim involving Vanzan Inc., not Blake personally. This makes the situation look even more suspicious. In the end, it appears Blake and Ryan rushed to claim victory before the court process was over. If they had a strong case, they wouldn't need shortcuts. But now, with all these legal problems and privacy violations coming to light, it's starting to look like they may have gone too far. Blake Lively is now so sure there's a smear campaign against her that she's accusing Brian Friedman and his entire law firm of being involved in it. It's not just about the possible subpoenas aimed at content creators like Candace Owens, Perez Hilton, or Andy Signore, which still aren't confirmed, but now she's going after the attorneys who represent them, claiming they're part of a coordinated effort to damage her reputation. In a recent legal filing in California, Ellen GOP, the attorney defending Brian Friedman's law firm, responded to Blake's claims. Blake says she should be allowed to get documents from the law firm because, in her view, the firm acted as a witness or helper in spreading negative information about her. She points to Friedman's past work with famous clients and some comments he made to the media as supposed proof. But GOP pushed back, arguing that just because an attorney speaks to the press doesn't give someone the right to dig through their private legal files. If that were the case, Blake's own legal team, who've made their own public comments, would also be exposed to similar demands. The motion argues that Blake's subpoena is not really about gathering crucial evidence, but rather a way to harass her opponents, something often referred to as a fishing expedition. Under a legal test known as Shelton, a party can't demand information from a lawyer unless it's absolutely necessary for building the case. The court usually protects attorney-client communication and internal documents, unless there's a very strong reason to allow access. Blake hasn't met that standard. One of Blake's arguments is that she needs financial records and phone bills from everyone in the law firm, claiming it might help prove a theory that they coordinated negative press as retaliation. But the law firm says this is unreasonable and overly broad. Asking for that kind of private information not only invades people's privacy, but it also places a heavy burden on a third party who isn't even directly involved in the case. Most likely, Blake knows her request will be denied. That might explain why she's trying to get the same type of information directly from content creators instead. She's trying to prove that Wayfair gave information to these creators to harm her image after she filed her lawsuit, even if someone from Wayfair answered questions or gave public statements. That doesn't prove retaliation, especially since Blake and her team have done the same thing. In fact, Blake has spoken publicly about this more than almost anyone else involved. People like Justin Baldoni, Jen Abel, Melissa Nathan, and Steve Sarowitz have stayed mostly quiet. Blake wants to tie the creators, the law firm, and the Wayfair parties together into one story of retaliation. But in court, that's not enough. Lawyers are allowed to speak for their clients, and public figures are often involved in media conversations. Her attempt to label that as an attack doesn't meet the legal standard for getting access to protected legal documents. What she's trying to do appears to be more about shutting people up than about justice. Jamie Heath hasn't said a single word. Jed Wallace has also remained completely silent. No one involved has made any public statements except for Blake. She's the only one speaking out. Now, she's trying to argue that content creators were paid by others involved in the case, and she wants that to count as evidence of retaliation against her. But the problem is, she doesn't actually have proof to back up that claim, since Blake likely knows that the digital evidence she's using will be dismissed in court due to how it was gathered. She's scrambling to find another way to prove her point. If the judge rules that the data from the so-called digital campaign can't be used because of legal violations, then her entire argument falls apart. That's why she's shifting focus. Instead of relying on the questionable evidence, she's now trying to say that people associated with Wayfair spoke to or paid influencers and content creators as a way to get back at her. But that claim doesn't hold water, to be clear. No. One has been paid at least not me, and I haven't spoken to any content creator who has received any money. Most of us are simply reacting to what's already public. We're talking about things that have been said in interviews, court filings, and open legal documents. Nothing secret about that. People are just sharing opinions based on what's already out there, so what's really happening here? In my opinion, Blake and Ryan are feeling the pressure. They know the evidence they've been counting on may soon be ruled invalid. And if that happens, they could be in trouble not just in terms of losing the case, but facing consequences for the way the evidence was obtained. They could be accused of misusing the legal process and invading people's privacy. That could lead to more legal problems for them, possibly even financial penalties or sanctions. Instead of accepting that, seems like they're trying to shift the focus and blame others for the backlash. They're pointing fingers at content creators and influencers, hoping that people will stop paying attention to how they gathered their evidence in the first place. But that strategy won't work if the court sticks to the rules and looks at what really matters. So those are my thoughts on the situation. What do you think? I'd love to hear your opinion in the comments. Don't forget to give this video a like if you found it helpful or interesting. Okay, also, if you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications by clicking the bell icon so you don't miss any future updates. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.